The story I'll share today is one of aching hearts and quiet bravery. So real, it might just leave you breathless. In the heart of the western frontier, where firelight dances on worn cabin walls and every shadow holds a secret, two souls met on the edge of ruin, under skies too wide for lies. It all started with a simple truth spoken in fear, and an answer that melted years of pain. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Under the sharp breath of an Arizona spring, the land cracked and whispered like it held secrets too old to name. This is where the story of May Dellinger begins, a widow whose bones had learned the rhythm of solitude and whose hands bore the proof of every battle fought to keep her patch of desert breathing. Since fever took her husband, the Dust Creek folk whispered that she ought to sell out, head east, where life wasn't carved from grit and silence. But May had no interest in giving up. The ground beneath her feet was more than just soil. It carried the sweat of Will Dellinger, the dreams of her father Amos, and the stubborn beat of her own heart. Each cracked beam, each warped barrel, each fence post leaning too far, she faced them all with only her own two hands. And she didn't flinch. Not once. She rose with the dawn, shoulders squared to the wind, and when the night came down, she whispered to herself, "Just hang on." One morning, while hammering a splintered rail back into place, she saw it, a thin line of dust far off where the sky met the hardpan. It rose slow and steady, like a warning coiled in the breeze. May wiped her brow with the back of her glove and reached for the rifle leaning by the corral. Folks didn't come this far out without a reason, and most of those reasons weren't good. As the dust thickened and the shape of a horse appeared, she braced the butt of the rifle against her hip. Her breath was calm, but her grip was sure. The rider broke into view, a lean, dust-colored mare carrying a tall man whose silhouette cut clean against the sky. He slowed at the gate, reined in gently, and raised a single hand, open palm, no threat. Still, May didn't lower the barrel. "You're on private land," she said, voice flat but firm. The man answered in a voice that came low, smooth, layered faintly with the cadence of another tongue. "I know." A pause. "Name's Ash Blackthorn. Saw the smoke from your chimney. Thought maybe someone needed help." May studied him, the long blade strapped at his side, the sun-hardened skin, the sharp jaw. His black hair was braided over one shoulder, a single raven feather tied near the end. No hat, no twitchy eyes, no shiftiness, just calm, present. "No trouble here," she replied, "and I'm not looking for company." "Didn't come to cause any," he said evenly. "My mare lost a shoe 2 days back. I patched her up best I could. Been riding long without a warm meal. Was hoping to trade work for food." May hesitated. One more mouth meant less to stretch, but his eyes held no deceit, not like those slick-tongued drifters she'd learned to spot. And his mare, though rib-thin, was brushed clean, coat gleaming in a way that spoke of care, not neglect. "What kind of work?" she asked, rifle still slanted across her chest. Ash nodded toward the fence behind her. "That split rail's gonna give way soon. Could brace it before it folds." Her jaw clenched slightly. That same rail had mocked her for weeks, and while every nerve told her to keep her distance, something deeper stirred. A bone-deep ache for quiet company, for the sound of someone else's hands working alongside hers. "You can water your horse at the trough," she said at last, voice quieter. "Beans are on the stove." Ash dipped his head, a small gesture that spoke more than words. "Thank you." She didn't relax the rifle just yet, but she didn't raise it either. And that was the beginning, not of trouble, but of something neither of them could yet name. "Thank you." May kept her eyes on him as he dismounted. On the ground, he stood taller than she'd figured, his presence filling the space like a quiet tide. No swagger, no twitch, just steady bones and silence. He walked his mare to the trough with an easy grace, letting her drink slow, like every drop mattered. Nothing hurried in his motion, nothing wasteful. He didn't gawk at the land, didn't scan it like men looking to claim. He just saw it, like someone who remembered everything he noticed. Inside, May ladled beans into a dented tin bowl, dropped a thick slice of bread beside it. She stayed close to the stove when Ash stepped through the door. The rifle was still within reach. He peeled off his thin gloves before sitting, nodded once, said nothing. Then ate, not like a man trying to earn favor, but like someone who knew what it meant to wait out hunger. Long and slow. "You been on your own long?" he asked between bites. May didn't answer right away. "Since last March. Will didn't make it through the cold." Ash's spoon paused mid-air, his eyes steady on the beans. "That's rough." She shrugged, though the sound caught in her throat. "The land doesn't stop needing hands just 'cause there's only one left." "True enough," he said, quiet now. He scraped the bowl clean, then set it down gentle on the table, not carelessly like most drifters did, but with the kind of care folks reserved for things that mattered. Then he stood. "I'll see to that fence." By late afternoon, the rail was reinforced tight. He'd patched the sag on the barn roof, too, and fixed the chicken wire that had been dangling since last summer. May hadn't asked, didn't need to. Ash didn't speak while he worked. But his eyes missed nothing, the barrel leaning crooked by the shed, the porch rail giving way, the post at the corral tilting west with every gust. He didn't comment, just saw. When the light stretched low across the yard, he led his horse to the shed. "I'll bunk down here," he said plainly. "If you've got an old blanket, I can make do." May opened the trunk by the bed and pulled out Will's trail blanket, worn soft with time, but still clean. The weight of it in her arms stirred something she didn't name. She passed it to him. "You riding on come morning?" she asked. "That's the thought," he answered, "unless you've got more kneading done." Her lips parted, but no words came. The fence, the roof, the porch, they'd all been calling for weeks, but more than that. The nights had been too long, too quiet. "There's patchwork needs doing on the roof," she said finally. "You see to that, and I'll keep you fed." Ash gave a small nod, not wasting a breath. "All right." He turned toward the shed, the last rays of sunlight brushing over his back like a promise unspoken. May stayed out in the yard a moment longer. The rifle was still nearby, but her hand wasn't wrapped around it anymore. That night she kept it propped beside the bed, like always. But when the wind pushed at the shutters, her mind didn't go to danger. It drifted instead to the air around the place. How it felt somehow less hollow now. Less like waiting. Morning cracked open with that fierce desert glare that makes everything sharp and real. May stepped outside with the feed pail tucked under one arm, squinting toward the shed. She half expected him to still be wrapped in the old blanket, but Ash Blackthorn was already at work. Crouched at the fence he'd mended, palm flat against the rail, like he was checking if the wood had settled with the night, like the land was talking back to him. Ash moved his hand slowly along the fence rail, as if listening through his skin, checking if the wood had shifted in the night. His mare grazed quietly nearby, and for a moment he looked like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. But May Dellinger knew better than to believe in things like belonging, not in a place that gave so little and took so much. By mid-morning, he'd set a ladder against the barn, and was working his way across the roof. Each shingle he pried loose, every nail he drove, He did it with a kind of quiet care that caught May off guard. She kept herself busy mending an old feed sack, but her eyes betrayed her, drifting again and again toward the shape of his back against the sunlit sky. He worked like every nail had weight, like every swing of the hammer was a promise to get it right. When he climbed down and wiped his brow, he asked, plain as ever, "What else?" May nearly smiled. The way he asked, it wasn't impatient, just honest. "You don't stop, do you?" she said. "Not while there's light left," Ash answered. The day rolled on. He mended chicken wire, stacked firewood, hauled water without needing to be told. May couldn't explain why it shook her up, but it did. Not because he was there, but because it felt so natural having someone else moving in rhythm beside her. She had forgotten the sound of another pair of boots scraping dirt, the comfort of shared silence filled with purpose. By noon, she'd simmered a pot of stew, rabbit, beans, onion, and set it out on the porch table. Ash took the bowl with a nod, sat on the steps, and ate without hurry. For all the labor he'd done that morning, he didn't gulp it down. He ate like every spoonful deserved its own breath. May sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You always eat that slow?" He looked up, eyes calm and clear. "Food's not something to rush." The words stirred something quiet inside her. Her father, Amos, had eaten that way too. Slow, like each bite was a kind of prayer for the hands that made it. When the bowl was empty, Ash rinsed it at the trough, using a cloth from his own saddlebag. Then went right back to stacking wood like it wasn't anything special. And maybe that's what caught her most. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't act like he was owed. May stood there, torn between irritation and relief. Irritated at herself for letting the place slide so far. Relieved, because for the first time in months, it didn't feel like she was losing the fight with her own land. Then she heard it. The creak of old wagon wheels, uneven and sharp, cut across the yard. Her spine stiffened. She knew that sound. Rufus Harlan's rig. Sure enough, the old mule team wheeled up to her gate and stopped. Rufus looked around slow, his eyes landing on Ash with a stare that stuck. His mouth tightened. "Didn't figure you for the type to keep company," he said, loud enough for both of them to hear. May didn't flinch. "He's helping with the work." Her tone was even, her stance steady. But she caught the way Rufus's gaze roamed from Ash's broad shoulders to the fixed chicken wire, the fresh woodpile, the straightened fence. He curled his lip. "That so?" Ash didn't say a word. He stood a few feet off, hauling kindling, his expression unreadable. Rufus shifted in his seat, spat into the dirt. "Folks talk, May," he said with a drawl. "Say Apache men don't stay long unless they're fixing to take something. One way or another." The words struck like a slap. May felt heat rise into her chest. Her fingers tightened around the gate rail, her jaw set hard. "I don't give much mind to talk, Rufus." He narrowed his eyes at her, squinting, testing. But May didn't back down. Not an inch. Rufus Harlan squinted from his seat, testing her like a man who thought his name still carried weight. Then, without another word, he snapped the reins. The wagon creaked forward and rolled off down the dirt path, leaving a trail of dust that hung in the air long after he vanished. When the sound faded, May turned back toward the house. Ash was stacking kindling near the porch, calm as ever. His face didn't shift much, but in his eyes, just for a breath, she caught something raw, a flicker of old exhaustion, tempered by the kind of restraint a man learned after too many years keeping his fists at his sides. You don't have to pay him no mind, she said, sharper than she meant. Ash didn't flinch. I've heard worse, he replied, voice even. Doesn't change the work that's got to be done. He bent, picked up the hatchet, and drove it clean through a chunk of wood. The crack split through the yard like punctuation. Final, unbothered, like Harlan's words had been split apart right along with the log. That night, the desert cooled fast, the kind of cold that clung to bones. May lit a lantern and brought 2 mugs of coffee to the porch. Set them down between them without a word. Ash sat beside her, elbows on his knees, the firelight brushing his cheekbones. Still. Quiet. Watching the dark roll in over the hills. You said you've been alone since March, he said after a long moment. May nodded, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. Fever took Will. After that, it was just me. No brothers, no kin, no one came around, not even for courtin'. Ash didn't offer pity. He didn't rush in with soft words or false comfort. He just let the silence settle like dust, leaving space for what she wanted to give. I've managed, May said finally. Some days stretch longer than they ought to is all. Long days go easier with more than one set of hands, he said, quiet. May looked at him over her mug. You planning on staying long enough to make 'em easier? A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Barely there. Depends if there's more work. She tipped her chin towards the north fence. Posts out there are leanin', needs replacin'. Then I'll see to it tomorrow. Later that night, May stood at the window and watched him move into the shed. He spread the blanket she'd given him over his bedroll, laid his knife within reach like a man who knew better than to let his guard drop. She let the curtain fall. This was a trade. Labor for food. That's what she kept telling herself. But as she banked the fire, something warm stirred underneath the thought. Something steadier. Something harder to shake. Morning broke clean, the kind of light that sharpened every shadow. May stepped out into the cool air, coffee steaming in her hands. Ash was already saddling his mare. Heading somewhere? She asked. Riverbed, he said, tightening the strap. Mesquite should be blooming. Buzzards'll be out working. That's a good sign for planting. She tilted her head. You checking on flowers? He glanced at her, a glint in his eyes. Not just flowers? Not just flowers, Ash said, his eyes steady beneath the brimless braid. You can read a whole season in how the buzzards of the hollow move. He looked up, gaze catching hers. Come on, I'll show you. May hesitated. The north fence could wait. It always had. She'd spent years patching things alone, but no one had ever asked her to look at the land through their eyes before. No one had ever offered something quieter, deeper. All right, she said softly. Give me a minute. She turned toward the cabin to grab her shawl and caught herself nearly smiling. The silence between them was shifting. No longer the silence of strangers. It was becoming something else. Something unnamed, but already there, breathing beneath the surface. The first warning came with the wind. That afternoon had been calm, the kind of still where the land felt like it was holding its breath. May was stacking wood by the porch when a gust from the south barreled in, hot, sharp, flinging grit into her face, slamming the barn doors against their frames. She looked up as the light dimmed, the sky turning the color of raw metal. Ash stepped out of the chicken run, eyes locked on the horizon. Storm's moving fast, he said, like dragons pulling it in. His voice was low, but there was no doubt in it. May shaded her eyes, squinting towards the mountains. A thick wall of cloud was boiling over the peaks, bruised and rising, angry. It wasn't supposed to rain till next week, she muttered. The desert doesn't follow anyone's calendar, he said. He swung into the saddle in one swift motion and urged his mare toward the pasture. "I'll check the river before it hits." By the time May had pulled the last of the wash off the line, the wind had doubled in strength. Sheets cracked like gunfire around her legs. The air buzzed with a rising hum, electric and wild. She slammed the cabin door just as thunder cracked overhead. So close it shook her teeth. Moments later, Ash galloped back through the gate, rain already soaking his vest, braid slick against his back. He swung down fast, led his mare into the shed, his voice short and clipped. "River's rising. Fast. If it keeps climbing, the low pasture'll flood and take half your fence with it." May's voice was barely a thread in the wind. "We don't keep stock there this time of year." "Doesn't matter. If the bank gives way, you'll lose more than fencing." Lightning split the sky in a blinding flash, followed instantly by a roar that rolled through the earth beneath their boots. Rain came sideways, cold, sharp, relentless, stinging her cheeks like broken glass. Ash threw the old trail blanket over his mare and turned back. Without a word, he caught her by the arm and guided her toward the cabin. Inside, it was dim and tight. The windows shuddered beneath the storm's howl. May moved without thinking, setting the kettle on the stove more out of instinct than need. Her fingers moved fast, trying to mask the tremble running through them. But the air between them was no longer cold. It was charged, with storm, with breath, with something neither of them had dared name. Ash shrugged off his soaked vest and shirt, laying them out near the fire where the heat could chase out the damp. May turned to the old trunk near the hearth, pulled one of Will's cotton work shirts from the bottom, and held it out without meeting Ash's eyes. "You'll need this," she said simply. He took it, slipped it on. The sleeves rode a little short on his arms, but he didn't complain, just tugged the cuffs once and let it be. "You always this ready for a storm?" he asked. "I try," she replied, adjusting the kettle. "Out here storms don't send warning." For a while, the only sound was the rain pounding the roof, the wind humming at the window seams, and the whistle of the kettle rising like a ghost between them. Ash leaned back against the table, arms crossed, watching her. Not intruding, not pressing, just being there. It wasn't the weight of danger that filled the room. It was the kind of presence that came from someone who'd carried his own burdens long enough to recognize theirs in others, someone who'd come to expect trouble as part of living. "How long have you been holding this place together on your own?" he asked. May kept her eyes on the steam rising from the kettle. "Since Will passed. Near a year now. Didn't have much choice." "You did," Ash said, voice gentle. "Most folks would have packed up and gone." Her jaw worked slightly. "I don't believe in leaving things behind." He didn't push it. Let the silence stretch out, filled by the drum of rain on the roof. Then, after a long beat, his voice dropped to something quieter, something heavier. "My brother didn't make it back from the war." May turned at that. The sharp edge in his tone caught her off guard. "I didn't know you had a brother." "Most don't." His eyes dropped to his hands. "He was younger, wild, thought he could outrun lead." He exhaled slowly. "I made it back. Still don't know why it was me and not him." His words didn't fall lightly. They settled into the corners of the room like ash after a fire. May moved to the table, set down 2 mugs of coffee, slid one toward him. She didn't ask questions, didn't fill the quiet with noise. She let the storm outside do the talking for both of them. Finally, she said, "What was he like?" Ash's mouth twitched, just barely. "Quicker than me with a rope, always picking fights for causes he half believed in, even if it meant getting busted up." He looked at her, dark eyes steady. "I miss him. Every damn day. May nodded. I never had a brother. Never had anyone stick around, really. Not even for courtin'. Their gazes met across the steam curling between them. Neither looked away. There was no sympathy in Ash's expression. No soft judgment. Just the quiet recognition of someone who knew what it meant to carry emptiness for too long. The storm outside eased from fury to a steady rhythm. But the river hadn't stopped rising. Ash stood, already reaching for his boots. We need to dig a trench, he said, before that wash eats more of your field. May blinked. In this weather? He looked at her, calm and certain. Only when it matters. Without another word, they stepped out into the rain together. The ground pulled at their boots, slick and heavy, as they moved side by side toward the edge of the north field. The wash ran high and fast now, angry, alive, and there was no time to wait for the sun. Water. The color of rust rushed at their boots, thick with silt and fury. Ash drove his shovel deep into the mud, carving a firm line into the soaked earth. Here, he said, his voice steady through the downpour. We'll pull it wide. Let it draw off from the fence. May pressed her weight into her own shovel, forcing it into the sodden ground. The soil clung to the blade like it didn't want to let go, but she kept digging. Shoulder to shoulder beside him, matching his rhythm. Rain ran down her back, tangled her hair, and soaked her dress clear through. But she didn't stop. Ash slowed when her breath turned sharp, never moving too far ahead, never letting her fall behind. Just stayed with her, step by muddy step. Bit by bit, the trench began to take shape. The runoff caught the new channel and twisted away from the fence, dragging danger with it. By the time they made it back to the cabin, the sky was cracking open. Shafts of light spilled across the wet yard like a quiet apology. Inside, the fire burned hot, steam rising from the logs and clothes alike. May peeled off her sweater and hung it near the hearth, then dropped into the chair across from him. You're not what I figured, she said softly. Ash raised an eyebrow. What did you figure? I don't know. She gestured toward the roof patched tight, the fence holding firm, the trench still cutting water out back. Just not this. Most men that pass through want food and a dry place to rest. Not much else. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. I ain't most men. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed, alive and waiting. For the first time since Will died, May felt the walls of her cabin holding more than just her grief. Something else had taken root. Something real. Something that might, in time, grow strong enough to weather more than storms. By morning, the storm was gone, scrubbed from the land like chalk off a slate. The air smelled clean, sharp with the scent of wet dirt and mesquite bark. May stepped outside, coffee warm in her hands. The sky stretched wide, pale and streaked with thin bands of cloud. The wash no longer raged. It whispered. Ash was tending to his mare when he looked up, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. River's dropped, he said. Mesquite should be blooming. May tilted her head. Mesquite? He nodded. Pods make meal. Bark's medicine. Blossoms feed the buzzers. You can read a whole season in one grove. His gaze held hers. Come on, he said gently. I'll show you. For a second she glanced back at the fence, still leaning, the work waiting. But her fingers itched for something else. Something more than hammering nails and chasing repairs. Something that belonged to the land, not the fight to tame it. All right, she whispered. Just give me a minute. They rode down into a dry arroyo where the dirt grew darker and richer. Ash pointed out things as they went. A patch of wild onions tucked in the brush. the thick pads of prickly pear heavy with swelling buds. A thin-stalked agave just beginning to rise. He didn't speak like some teacher, more like a man replaying memories his grandfather once shared. "Yucca-root'll make soap," he said, patting a clump as they passed. "Beat it right, and it'll lather enough to get you through when water's scarce." May gave a soft smile. Never thought soap was something you had to stumble across instead of buy. "Out here," he said, "you find or you make. Nothing comes easy." They crossed the San Pedro, where the flow thinned to ankle deep, stones slick beneath the horses' hooves. On the far side, mesquite trees waited, branches bent under pale yellow blossoms. The air was thick with the low hum of buzzers of the hollow, not angry, just working. The sweetness of pollen drifted on the wind. Ash dismounted first, tying his reins to a twisted branch. May followed, though her knot earned a quiet chuckle from him. "That won't hold a squirrel," he muttered, retightening it with a few practiced flicks of his fingers. "There," he said, patting the rope. "Won't rub her raw." May shook her head, half amused. "You've tied a few in your day, huh?" "A few." They stepped under the canopy together, brushing past the fronds heavy with bloom. Thin shafts of sunlight broke through, catching dust swirling in the air. May reached up and let the petals graze her fingertips. "They're beautiful," she whispered. Ash plucked a small cluster from a low branch, careful, delicate, and placed it in her hand. The petals quivered in her open palm. She lifted them to her cheek. "Feels like spring's trying to apologize for winter." Ash looked at her for a long moment. Steady. Quiet. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like you see more than just what's there." She shrugged, suddenly aware of how close they stood. Funny how the space had shrunk without either of them moving. The blossoms trembled in her hand, the scent curling between them. "I never learned how to do small talk," she admitted. Then, before she could stop it, the truth slipped out, soft and breakable. "I've never been kissed." It hung there, more intimate than any storm they'd ever crossed. And somehow, gentler. Ash didn't look away, didn't touch her, didn't move in. He just said, voice quiet and solid, "Then we'll start slow." May felt her pulse thumping in her ears, each beat loud and unsure. "I wouldn't know how," she whispered. May didn't need to know anything. Not right then. For a long while they just stood there, quiet. The soft hum of the buzzers of the hollow drifted lazily around them. The golden air was thick with the perfume of spring blossoms, the kind that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath. May's shoulders slowly began to ease. The tightness she'd carried for months, maybe years, let go just a little. Eventually, the two of them sat beneath one of the bigger trees, their backs resting against the same rough trunk. Just a hand's width of space between them. Ash spoke low, telling her how his people once ground mesquite pods into flour, boiled bark into healing broth, steeped blossoms into tea. He spoke of early mornings along the river with his grandfather, Red Hawk, who'd talk about the days before fences carved the land into pieces. "Do you miss it?" May asked. "Every damn day," Ash said, plain and honest, "but missing it don't bring it back. You carry what you can, and leave the rest behind." May turned a cluster of pale blossoms in her hand, the petals like silk on her fingers. Her thoughts drifted to what she'd lost. The fever, the silence, the house that always felt too big for just her and June. But for the first time since Will Dellinger passed, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own life. Not on that ride back home. They didn't say much, but the air between them, it had shifted. Not heavier, not lighter, just different. Like the invisible line that kept them strangers had moved. Something had changed. Quietly. Certainly. That night, May placed the blossoms in a little tin cup on her kitchen table. Their scent filled the room, and every time it drifted toward her, she heard his voice again in her head. Then we'll start slow. The invitation came folded tight in a young boy's hand, his hat crooked as he stood fidgeting at May's gate. Hester Quill was hosting the spring dance over in Benson, and to May's quiet surprise, her name was on the guest list. She hadn't been to a dance since her father Amos first took ill, years before the fever took Will. At first, she meant to ignore it. Let the night slip by without a ripple. But Ash had seen the slip of paper resting on her kitchen table. "You thinking of going?" he asked, voice quiet. May gave a half shrug, unsure. "Feels strange. Folks still see me as the widow who sat in corners, bringing pie no one touched." He looked at her, steady as always. "If you want to go, I'll go with you." It was a simple offer, but it echoed in her chest long after he'd said it. 2 weeks later, they rode into Benson together, evening air warm against their skin. May wore a pale cotton dress she'd hemmed herself. Her hands had shaken more from nerves than excitement. Ash rode beside her, looking like he belonged to the land itself. Broad shoulders beneath a crisp white shirt, a buckskin vest, and a fresh braid tied with a strip of red cloth above a single raven feather. Lanterns hung across the schoolhouse porch, casting soft halos of light. And from the open windows, the sound of fiddle music spilled out into the night. Laughter spilled from the open windows, mixing with the scent of roasted beef and fresh coffee. May Dellinger could feel it, the hush that fell the moment she and Ash Blackthorne stepped down from the saddle. Some faces softened in surprise. Others stiffened, wary. Ash offered his arm without a word. May paused for just a heartbeat, then slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. Inside, the tables had been pushed back against the walls, leaving a stretch of worn floorboards for couples to sway and spin. The low hum of conversation wrapped around them. May's heartbeat ticked faster. Her palms felt slick. But when Ash placed his hand gently at the small of her back, something in her loosened. His voice came low. "You don't have to dance." "I want to," she said, and it startled her how much she meant it. The fiddle caught up a spirited reel, but Ash didn't rush, didn't tug. His steps were small, measured, leading her in a slow circle, one steady beat at a time. His hand, calloused and warm, gripped hers with quiet confidence. May let herself fall into the rhythm, the rest of the room melting away until there was only his presence, the weight of his hand, the quiet space he made for her. When the music ended, he didn't let go right away. And when the next song began, he moved with her again. No hurry. His gaze never once strayed. For the first time in what felt like forever, May didn't feel like a ghost clinging to the edge of a crowd. She felt seen. Still, the whispers came fast as the music. She caught sight of Ida Harlan across the room, mouth drawn tight. And she heard two men near the door, Jed Wilkes, Boone Keller, murmuring low, one shaking his head in disapproval. Yet others smiled, nodded, even offered a kind word as the tune faded. When they stepped out into the night for air, the lantern above the door swayed gently in the breeze. May exhaled. The coolness steadied her nerves, until a voice sliced through the dark. "Blackthorne." They turned. A figure emerged from the shadows of the street. May recognized him instantly. Silas Crow. The grin on his face didn't reach his eyes, and the red sash at his waist burned bright against the gloom. "Didn't expect to find you dancing, Blackthorn," Crow said. "Strange pastime for a man the army once called brother, then traitor." The shift in the air was sharp. Ash's jaw clenched, but his voice came level. "Safe travels, Crow." Crow's eyes slid to May. They lingered there just long enough to curdle her stomach. Then back to Ash. "Funny thing," Crow said, "how women forget what men have done. Towns, too, but not everyone does." With that, he turned and walked away, boots kicking up dust behind him, leaving only silence in his wake. It hung between them, thick as the storm that had rolled in days before. May looked up at Ash, studying the shadows on his face, shadows carved from battles she didn't yet understand. "Is it true?" she asked softly. "What he said?" Ash met her gaze, dark, steady. "Truth depends on who's telling it." She wanted to press him, to demand the story behind that word, traitor, but something in his expression told her the wound was still too deep and not yet ready for light. They stood beneath the soft glow of the lantern, just beyond the saloon door. The muffled hum of fiddle strings and boot steps still floated on the breeze. Let the town whisper if it must. May had made up her mind. She didn't care what the Dust Creek folk might say. This was the man who had fixed her fence, hauled her harvest, and stood watch in silence when the storms rolled in. This was the man who hadn't taken her hand in pride, but in care, who'd led her across the dance floor like she mattered. She could believe the talk, or believe the one who had lightened the weight of her days without asking for a single thing in return. Her hand slipped into Ash's, firm despite the quiver in her chest. "Come back inside," she murmured, voice low. "I'm not done dancing yet." By the time they made it back to the homestead, the moon hung high, pouring silver over the mesquite brush and tracing the bend of the creek beyond. The ride had passed quiet, but May's thoughts hadn't. She kept hearing the sharp-edged words back at the schoolhouse, the trader's warning glare, the hush that followed whenever Ash's name was spoken. But when she looked over and saw him upright in the saddle, moonlight glinting off the braid that hung down his back, her heart steadied. Let the town keep its doubts. She'd seen what his hands could do, how he moved through this world without needing to explain himself. He had carried her through that dance like she was worth being seen. Inside, she lit the small lamp. Its glow spilled across the walls like a hush. Ash set down their belongings the way he always did, quiet, exact, careful. May thought of the many nights she'd left him by the hearth, or out in the shed, telling herself it was better that way. Cleaner, safer, proper, but not tonight. Tonight, the thought of sending him away left her aching. She turned to him, reached for his hand. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't let go. "Stay," she said, plain and sure. Ash didn't speak. He just looked at her, steady, waiting, no demand in his eyes. May took a breath. Then she led him, not to the fire, not to the shed, but to her room. The lamp's light flickered across the walls. Their shadows followed. They lay side by side. Boots off, clothes still smelling of smoke and dust and oil. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet wasn't hollow now. It was full, brimming with something gentle, something alive. Ash's hand settled over hers, calm and unrushed. May let her breathing fall into rhythm with his. No hurry, no flame meant to burn, just the quiet grace of being held without condition. For too many years, her nights had been filled with nothing but wind through the shutters and the ache of emptiness. But now, as the pale morning light slipped through the cracks, She woke to the steady warmth of another heart beside her. There were no vows spoken, no grand confession whispered into the dusk, but when May Dellinger turned her face and caught Ash Blackthorne watching her, already awake, already steady, she felt it deep in her chest. This wasn't about chores traded for meals, or a roof raised against winter winds. This was the quiet forming of something lasting, something rooted so deep it didn't need words to be real. Two souls, battered but breathing, had found one another out here, in this harsh, wide country where mercy came rare. And without fuss or fanfare, they had started to shape something that resembled home. After the night of the dance, time began to settle into something new. Mornings crept in with soft light slipping past the shutters, the scent of fresh brewed coffee curling through the air. She wasn't waking up to silence anymore. There were 2 mugs on the table now, 2 pairs of boots resting by the door. Ash wasn't a man of noise or fuss. He didn't fill the room with words. But he was constant. He built a smokehouse from mesquite, tying each pole with care, placing every beam like it mattered. He fitted shelves in the pantry, smoothing the wood like it deserved gentleness. When tools and baskets and jars began piling up, he didn't complain. Just added a new room, enough for storage and a spare cot. His hands were shaping not just a shelter, but something that belonged to them both. May kept pace. She dug the back garden wider, turning the soil with her own hands, planting corn, beans, squash, watching each one take root like hope. The chickens she once kept more out of habit became a true flock now, enough to trade, enough to feed them through winter. Her days echoed with sounds she'd come to love. Feathers shifting, water sloshing in a bucket, the faint buzz of the buzzers of the hollow drifting over Jared's patch of wildflowers. They didn't talk much while working, but the quiet between them had changed. It held the rhythm of trust, of something shared. Evenings brought small talk over supper, sometimes only a line or 2, sometimes a story swapped under the glow of lamplight, and sometimes nothing more than sitting near, her hand resting lightly on his knee, his arm stretched along the back of her chair. It wasn't a blaze that burned hot and wild. It was the kind of warmth that stays. Through wind, through seasons, through doubt. In town, the gossip shifted. At first, Dust Creek folk had stared when they came in together. The widow May Dellinger and the Apache man who'd once been a mystery. But time softened things. People got used to the sight of them, riding side by side, trading eggs for cloth or flour at the mercantile. The rumors began to thin when folks saw the fence mended, the garden blooming, the cabin holding strong with each passing year. Some still grumbled behind closed doors. But others, the ones who watched without speaking, started to nod with quiet respect. What once sparked scandal slowly began to look a whole lot like a family. And as the years turned, that truth became something no whisper could undo. The San Pedro ran low and quiet that summer, its banks crowded thick with cottonwoods and willows. Autumn came with a sharp breeze and the smell of mesquite smoke curling from their chimney. Every season left its trace on the land, and on them. Through each one, May Dellinger and Ash Blackthorne moved shoulder to shoulder, bound not just by labor, but by quiet understanding. In the fall of their 3rd year together, May gave birth to a daughter. They named her June, not after blood or memory. Neither of them had anyone left to honor. The name felt right, strong, honest, just like the child herself. Ash carved her a cradle from pine, sanding it down until the rails felt like silk beneath his rough hands. May, smiling with quiet joy, stitched a bonnet from scraps of that pale blue dress she once wore to the spring barn dance. When June's first cry echoed in the cabin, it cracked open a silence that had felt endless. Life grew louder, yes, but not chaotic, not uncertain. Each morning began with her cries mingling with the rooster's crow. Days were fuller, chores piling on, multiplied by the small needs of a newborn. But every task carried a rhythm, a purpose, a kind of peace. Ash's boots scuffed across the porch as he hauled in firewood. May's voice, soft and warm, floated through the house in lullabies while she rocked June by the hearth. Evenings always circled back to the same picture. May's hand resting on Ash's arm, their daughter's tiny fingers curled around theirs. Sure, the land still had teeth. Storms rolled in. Droughts crept close. Folks in town didn't always speak kindly, and shadows of old scars still flickered in Ash's quiet moods. But none of that tore at what they'd built. For the first time in what felt like forever, May didn't measure her life by what had been lost. She measured it by the sunlit mornings that started with laughter, by fences fixed, by the soft gasp of joy from her daughter, like sunlight spilling across a ridge. Out here, where the land demanded everything from those who dared to stay, May and Ash gave it all they had, their sweat, their faith, even their wounds. What they got in return wasn't ease. It wasn't gold. It wasn't the kind of tale sung over whiskey in saloons. No, what they made was quieter than that, deeper. They built something that held. The years passed like the San Pedro, sometimes slow, sometimes rushing. Storms came, droughts threatened, harvests went lean, then fat, then lean again. And still, May and Ash endured, not with speeches, but with steady hands, with a love that showed up every single day. One autumn evening, when the sky turned lavender and the air held the first nip of cold, the smoke curled from their chimney once more. May sat wrapped in her shawl on the porch, little June sleeping heavy against her chest. The girl's dark curls were damp with sleep. Her breath rose and fell against May's neck, soft as a heartbeat. Then came the sound. Boots on dry earth. Measured. Familiar. Ash was walking in from the fence line, his shirt damp with sweat, his stride tired but sure. And in that moment, May didn't need words. Home had found her, and she had built it herself. His steps were slow, measured, like he wasn't in any rush to outrun the fading light. He climbed the creaking porch and eased down beside her, close enough their shoulders brushed in quiet understanding. For a long while, neither said a word. They just sat there, side by side, watching as the sun dipped low behind the distant ridge, spilling streaks of rose gold across the wide open sky. May's voice broke the stillness, barely more than a whisper. "Do you ever wish you'd gone?" Ash turned to look at her, eyes steady, deep like the land itself. "Every sunrise tells me I made the right choice." May rested her cheek gently atop June's soft curls, her heart swelling with a kind of peace words could never quite hold. She remembered the first time she saw him, riding up in a haze of trail dust, a stranger with tired eyes and a quiet voice. He hadn't asked for much. Just water, a plate of food, a chance to earn his keep. She remembered the townsfolk's whispers, the storm that nearly tore the roof off her homestead, the bloom of mesquite in her hands the morning after. Bit by bit, those moments had shaped something solid between them. The West was never kind. Storms rolled in without warning. Creek beds dried up and fence posts rotted in place. Banks shifted. Seasons passed like the wind, hard and fast and unforgiving. But what they'd built here, together, it held, forged in silence, rooted in faith, It wasn't something the wind could ever scatter. As dusk deepened, the porch fell into shadow. May leaned gently into Ash's shoulder. June nestled warm and safe between them. The night settled quiet around their home, wrapping them in a calm deeper than words. There was no need to speak. The truth lived in the hush, in the man who once rode in from nowhere and became her shelter, her steady ground. And as the first stars blinked to life overhead, May knew this wasn't just a tale of getting by. It was about belonging, about what endures when everything else shifts. Storms will come, land will change. But what they'd built, together, anchored in trust, sealed in silence. It was the kind of thing no wind could ever carry away. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Sexto. Disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.